So today I'm going to be talking about Half-Life Alyx, and I haven't played Half-Life Alyx because I knew I wasn't going to be able to, afford a new headset and upgrade the PC and all that jazz. So I decided that I was just going to, watch some random guy stream it as soon as I could. I didn't want to be spoiled. I didn't want to be spoiled by like scrolling through the comment section of a video and have some random guy spoil it for me like that. I knew there was no possible way that I was gonna not get spoiled by however long it takes me to eventually play this game, which I probably won't even. I might not even play this game this year. I don't know when I'm gonna be able to play this game, but I'm looking forward to it. So whatever my opinions are about this game, just bear in mind that I didn't actually play it. So I'm going to try and be as objective as possible with that too, especially when it comes to any criticisms that I might have. And also, there's going to be spoilers in this too. I'm not going to try and avoid spoilers. I'm not going to try and do like a spoiler-free section and then a spoiler-filled section. They're just going to be spoilers. I don't know when they're going to happen, but it'll happen. So if you haven't seen it, just don't watch if you don't want to get spoiled. But I think the first thing I'll say is that the game does look really, really fun. I think the level of detail, the environment, the graphics, the music, the lighting, it all looks really great. And honestly, the thing that seems really amazing to me and continues to kind of like surprise me with little things that I didn't know you could do yet is just how much tiny little detail and interactivity you see. It seems like every once in a while I'll see a new image or a new video of somebody else playing through this, doing something that the last guy didn't do. And I didn't know you could do that. Like, I saw a video of a guy actually like using a functioning dry erase marker on a window, and then like had like a little eraser board thing and erasing the drawing. I was like, that's pretty cool. There's a globe you can spin around. I saw something else of like there's like a rat you could pick up, and I guess the rat would like wiggle around in your hand when you pick it up. Like that's cool. I think that's gonna be like the new Half-Life 2 Episode 2 gnome thing. You're gonna have to carry that rat around with you throughout the entire game. I'm sure people are definitely gonna try and do that. But yeah, the game does look really, really fun. It looks great. I mean, to be honest, we haven't had anything like this in a while. I mean, at all. I'd probably say the closest thing to this is Boneworks, and it still seems pretty far off from what I've seen. I haven't looked into Boneworks all that much because not having VR, I'm not going to bother myself with all this extra VR stuff. And they said it before about them recommending you play at least Half-Life 2 Episode 2 before playing this, and it's kind of, I mean, it's kind of true. It's definitely in there. I mean, right from the beginning of the game, it opens up with that like title sequence of 5 years before the Citadel and the death of Eli Vance, which I guess gives you a good timetable for when this is. That would be 15 years after Black Mesa, since Half-Life 2 is 20 after, yeah. So it gives you a nice timetable of when this is. It's been a while, and that 5 years before, it really shows because this game feels very much more like Half-Life 2 than it does Half-Life, if that makes sense. The environments, the characters, the enemies, it's all Half-Life 2, which is, I suppose it's fitting given that Half-Life 2 is the game more people are likely to have played. I mean, myself, I hadn't played Half-Life 1 for a while. I only just played it recently. And, you know, despite having played Half-Life 2 in the episodes for quite some time, I only just recently played Half-Life 1. So it was interesting. You know, I wanted to see if maybe they would have, you know, bring back some old Half-Life 2 enemies, or, you know, maybe one of the expansions, opposing force or whatever. But no, nothing like that. So they did kind of hit all the Half-Life 2 beats there. Obviously the barnacles, the headcrabs, zombies, which yes, those are in Half-Life 1 as well. But you know, the Combine, the Civil Protection, the Vortigons, the Antlions, and of course you got kind of new. And of course you got a new enemies there. There's a couple new Combine variants, like heavier variants with, you know, like I didn't really get any good look at the guns they were using, but I know a lot of them had like chain guns or something like that. You know, bigger machine guns, which is interesting. There's a couple new variants of the head crab, you know, like electricity head crab, which looked interesting, and like an armored tank-like head crab, which I think that's kind of neat. I like expanding the variations of the head crab, because Half-Life 2 did that too. Half-Life 2 introduced the poison head crab, and was there like a faster head? Well, there were faster zombies in Half-Life 2. When you get to Ravenholm, there's like the really fast zombies. Are they controlled by the poison head crabs, or are there I don't remember, honestly. I'm gonna have to. I know that game pretty well. I'm surprised that I'm blanking on this. Anyway, so it was cool to see a couple new variants of head crabs. It seemed like there was maybe a new variant or two of the Antlion. I'm not exactly sure. The Antlions aren't in it as much as other enemies are, and it's kind of like late in the game. I almost didn't think they were going to be in it. I was like, oh, you know, it's like level 8 out of 11 or something, and they come in. So it's kind of later into the game. Like I said, it's tough to have any criticisms of the game because I hadn't played it, and I don't want to say anything that's going to sound, you know, that's not going to sound right from someone who hasn't played it. Some observations I'll note is this one seemed much more horror based than the other Half-Life games, which the other Half-Life games of course had horror elements in them too. I mean, Half-Life 2 had the whole level of, you know, Ravenholm, and then I think Episode 1 had that level where you're waiting for the elevator to come down and the lights are off. You got to use the flashlight and the flares. I think that very specifically is kind of what I feel like inspired some of these Half-Life Alyx moments where, you know, you just got the flashlight in the dark. Which it doesn't seem like you can turn the flashlight on and off by yourself, which I would have liked. Because even if it's not pitch black, I find myself using the flashlight for just darker areas in general. You know, if I want to see detail or what's there. It would have been nice if the flashlight could have been turned on. I mean, maybe it can. Like I said, you know, I haven't played it myself, so I don't know every single thing about this. But it doesn't seem like you can turn it on by yourself. There's no melee weapons in the game, which, I don't know. That itself feels kind of sad. I mean, like, well, what's a Half-Life game without being able, to bash stuff with some type of blunt weapon? But I can see it when it comes to bashing or melee, it wouldn't really work in combat. You know, none of these enemies are enemies that you really want to get too close to, especially in like VR where your movement might be a little bit more restricted. I mean, maybe headcrabs, maybe bashing some headcrabs would have worked, but uh, I mean, you can kind of like weapon bash a little bit. I saw. I mean, you can't weapon bash the enemies, but there are breakable crates which you could like throw against the wall to break, or you could bash with your hands, or maybe just with your gun, or maybe just your hands. I don't know. So I mean, I guess that's something, because there are supplies, crates with supplies in them. All the all the Half-Life 2 elements like that were just nice to see again. It was really nice to see the paint cans kind of still function the way they used to in Half-Life 2. That was, for whatever reason, that was always something I had a lot of fun with in Half-Life 2, was, getting the gravity gun and blasting the wall with paint cans to get the paint spray all over the wall, trying to paint the whole wall. That was something I had fun with. But what else? Well, back to the horror. It does seem like there is a lot of horror stuff in this, which, I mentioned Half-Life 1 and Half-Life 2 had horror, so it's nothing new to the Half-Life franchise in general. It does seem a lot more of it than the other Half-Life games, I would say. Which makes sense. Horror is kind of a go-to in VR. It's kind of, most of VR, it feels like, has been more horror stuff. And that could maybe turn away some people who aren't as big into the horror side of things, especially someone who's new to VR and doesn't want to do horror that much. That could kind of turn them away. Maybe. The game seems to be doing pretty well. I haven't seen anything about people saying it was too scary. And then there is story mode. The person I was watching playing it, he was playing it on normal mode. So I think there's story, easy, normal, and hard. So who knows what story mode is probably like. Story mode's probably, if someone's not as good with the horror elements of it, they'll probably play story mode. I think I would play story mode just because, I'm not good at video games. I don't claim to be good at video games despite the fact how much I talk about them. So I would probably play story mode. Yeah, so I could see horror maybe being something that people don't like too much when it comes to Half-Life Alyx. Something else that kind of seemed a little odd. I don't know if odd is the right word, but something that I noticed is the game seems a little empty to me, and I don't know if empty is the best way to put it, because you always have a lot of enemies, and there's a lot of there's all this stuff you can interact with the world. But it seemed kind of lacking in the NPC department, which is odd because I feel like that's something that the Half-Life games have always, kind of excelled at, is the NPCs. I mean, I think that was one of the big things about the first Half-Life was NPCs and the AI they had. There really aren't that many NPCs in this game. There's maybe like 6 or 7. There's Russell, obviously. There's Eli. There's a couple of Vortigons. That's 4. There's just like a resistance girl you talk to briefly. And then one other guy. I don't remember his name. I could kind of see that other NPC being a late addition to the game, because they had the whole thing where you had an enemy they call him Jeff. The enemy called Jeff, he could only hear, so you had to kind of like be quiet, and you couldn't you couldn't like knock things over or shoot. And so I feel like that NPC might have been sort of a late addition to just explain to the player how, don't make a sound near this guy, because he does kind of like randomly disappear. I was expecting, to meet with this guy and maybe talk to him a little bit. So there really aren't a lot of NPCs in this game. And I guess, I don't know. What I think this game might have been lacking is kind of is like a story chapter. You look at Half-Life 2, it had Red Letter Day and Black Mesa East with a big kind of story chapters in this. It doesn't feel like there were a lot of story chapters or any story chapters in this game. There definitely wasn't a story chapter in this game from what I could see. I mean, you had story moments. You had the beginning where you were talking to Eli and Russell over the computer, and then you have another little one where you go to Russell's lab, and then you have another little story moment where you meet the first Vertigant, and then towards the end, that's basically story. But that's also kind of like end game story, which I don't really count that. But it doesn't feel like there were any big story stuff, which again feels like the lack of NPCs. And I mean, within the world, it does seem fine, because you are supposed to be in this quarantine zone, which is very, infected by Zen stuff, which does look really great. How Zen, flora has kind of taken over the buildings and stuff, and you even have like Zen stuff you got to interact with. There's some like bulb thing, which if you get too close to it, it'll blow up, so you kind of gotta, get close and then like back away once it starts getting angry. Now, trip mines are back in this. I haven't seen trip mines since the Half-Life game days. And there weren't any of the hopper things, the hopper mines. It would have been cool if you see one of those again, but you can't get everything, obviously. It also seemed a little light on the Easter egg department, which kinda surprised me, but it's really not that big of a deal, honestly. But I just figured, maybe they're throwing a mention of Barney or something, or I mean, you have a couple things. You have Isaac Kleiner's book. You had a couple newspapers with Dr. Breen on them. I think you have a little magazine. Dr. Breen was on like a Time magazine or something. Then there's the Half-Life mural. There was like a Half-Life mural that was painted by the Vortigaunt, which had Gordon Freeman in the center. That was pretty neat. The Vortigaunt stuff was really good. I like the new Vortigaunt a lot. They introduced the Vortigaunt with brain damage. I thought that was interesting. What else? I'm trying to just go step by step here. Not a lot of weapons. Not a lot of weapons in the game. Only 3. You get a pistol, a shotgun, and an SMG. It's not really anything like familiar. It's not a Spaz 12. The SMG's and an MP5. It's not even an AR2. The pistol does kind of seem like it's building towards the pistol that Alyx uses in Half-Life 2, which is neat. But, not a lot of weapons, no melee weapons, which I would have preferred, but it doesn't seem like there's a lot of moments where it would really be useful besides just random bashing of stuff, which you like to do in a Half-Life game, You whip out your crowbar and you bash a bunch of boxes for no reason and break them apart, and there's a table there, you break the table apart. But I guess it probably would have been a lot too if if you were to make stuff breakable, then you would also have to make the pieces interactable too, which that could have been that could have been a lot. Maybe for future VR stuff. Because in Half-Life 2, you break a table apart, eventually the pieces just despawn or whatever, fade away into nothingness. But in a game like this, if you were to break pieces apart, you would have to be able to interact with the pieces or feel a little less. The gravity gloves. The gravity gloves seemed like a cool feature in the game. What I'll say about them is the gravity gloves seemed useful. It didn't seem necessary, if that makes any sense. Because I feel like 90% of the game, they weren't really necessary. I mean, obviously they're very useful, especially if you don't want like tedious stuff of walking over to a bookshelf and grabbing something off the bookshelf. You could just whip it closer to you with the gravity gloves. It's admittedly very useful, and it seems like you end up using it a lot just naturally. But it doesn't really seem necessary. I mean, as much as the gravity gun in Half-Life 2 seemed very necessary, especially when you got physics puzzles and you got levels like Ravenholm where you're lower on ammo. You requires you to use the gravity gun in combat much more than you would in other levels. And speaking of physics puzzles, there's no physics puzzles, which is I don't really think there were physics. I didn't notice any physics puzzles, but especially for a physics game, you think that Valve would have a couple physics puzzles, but there are puzzles in general. The puzzles seemed interesting. Maybe they get a little tedious. I don't know. Then there's a lot of puzzles. You need to. You're constantly like unlocking stuff. There's little supply cabinets that you gotta unlock that'll have some goodies in there. You gotta unlock the upgrade stations. You gotta unlock. Well, I mean, not unlock. You gotta do a puzzle to unarm the trip mines, and then there's the puzzles for like turning stuff on. Which those puzzles looked really cool, kind of like the routing stuff, routing the electricity to a certain point to turn off a shield or open up a door. Those puzzles did look good. It's much more like VR puzzles almost, not physics puzzles as much, which I guess makes sense. If physics was kind of the bigger thing with Half-Life 2, then you don't need physics puzzles as much in Half-Life Alyx, since the bigger thing with Half-Life Alyx is VR. It's kind of like how I feel like seems like all the puzzles, so to speak, in the first Half-Life were jumping puzzles. Jumping and crouch jumping, and the double jumping shooting thing you get towards the end in Zen. So it seemed like there was jumping puzzles. There's not a lot of jumping puzzles in Half-Life 2, so maybe that's just how they work these things through. Ladders seem very weird. Not much you can do about ladders in VR, I feel like. Jumping seemed odd. It also seems like it allows you to jump way farther than you should and way lower down than you should. But, it's just one of those things. This is... Any criticism with this game is all... Even from someone who's played it. I mean, from someone who hasn't played it, not a lot of just criticism. But any criticism about this game is almost kind of, big deal, because we haven't had anything like this before. So it's not going to be perfect, but damn, this is pretty close to perfect if you ask me. So I don't know. What else can I think of? I don't want to, I just want to get everything out of the way before I get to kind of the end stuff and, the meat of the game. Oh, I mentioned the gravity gloves being useful, not necessary. I said it was about 90%. They weren't necessary. And it did seem one or two puzzles where you couldn't have completed the puzzles without the use of the gravity gloves. And then, of course, the end of the game, which is very similar to the end of Half-Life 2. You get all your weapons taken away, you get the supercharged gravity gun, and you're using that from now on. There is something very similar to that happens with Half-Life Alyx. You lose all your weapons, you're just using the gravity gun, and you're like taking these weird energy things off the wall and shooting them at it, like, I don't know. But you don't do it for very long. It's not like it's not like it was in Half-Life 2. Half-Life 2 you had about 2 full levels of just using the supercharged gravity gun. And in this it's much more shorter, which is fine. I'd say the levels, it didn't... The game also seemed maybe a little bit more like the episodes even than just Half-Life 2. Because Half-Life 2 definitely had very distinct different levels. And this doesn't seem to have levels as much as Half-Life 2 did, distinct segments. I did hear some people not liking the Northern Star section of the game as much, said that kind of maybe went on for a little bit too long. I don't know. Can't comment on that, but it doesn't seem like there were levels. It just kind of, everything just kind of flowed together. I mean, Half-Life 2 is very much like and this is the car driving level, and this is the boat driving level, and this is the, horror fighting zombies level, and this is the I gotta work with the team level. So it didn't really seem like that as much, just kind of everything. But that's also not a bad thing either, because it did seem like everything flowed naturally. And there is a lot of variety in the environments and stuff, because you're in an office building, you're in a hospital, you're in some underground Zen-infested tunnel, you're in a pitch black basement fighting zombies. So there's a lot of variety, but variety in a way that flowed naturally. So it does seem more like the episodes, kind of episode 1 specifically too. Because with episode 1, it didn't feel like there were a lot of variety in the levels. Episode 1 definitely felt like it flowed kind of fluidly throughout the thing. I mean, there's definitely, moments in episode 1, there's that big whole thing where you're in the water, you can't touch the water, it's electrified, kind of very similar to sand traps. And the stuff with the Combine train. Which the Combine train, that's... When does that happen? I don't know. I haven't played the episodes as much as Half-Life 2. I feel like I've played Half-Life 2 a lot, and Episode 2 a lot. Episode 2 is also very fun. And then Episode 1. I haven't played Episode 1 as much as the other stuff. And no real reason for that, honestly. I just like Half-Life 2 a lot. And so I think that's about all there is to say, really. If I can think of anything else, the humor is good. There's there's a lot of humorous moments. I mentioned the Vortigaunt with brain damage. There's some funny stuff there. Russell being in your ear was funny. There was the whole stuff about vodka was good. I liked that. I just would have liked some. I honestly would have liked more NPCs. I feel like with the NPCs, especially in Half-Life 2, you had a lot of humorous interactions between each other. You had obviously Griggs and Sheckley from Half-Life 2, Episode 2, all their interactions are fun. And I don't know, it's just fun in Half-Life 2 to go up and talk to these people. I thought, you had some opportunity there to interact with NPCs in like a VR way. I mean, off the top of my head, I was just thinking of something like, if you had an NPC holding a bottle of beer or something, you could use the gravity grumps to like take it away, and he react to like, hey, I was drinking that or something. I don't know. But I guess you don't need like humorous NPC interactions as much when you're when you have the humorous Alyx and Russell interactions, which does have the nice element of humor when it comes to like the generational thing. You know, Russell being from a time that remembers what the world was like before the Combine, and this is kind of what all Russell knows. I mean, this is kind of all that Alyx knows, which is a different twist to have an older humorous character, because there weren't a whole lot of humorous moments with characters like Eli Vance or Isaac Kleiner as much. I mean, there was some humor with Isaac Kleiner, but that kind of humor with those characters in Half-Life 2, the humor came more from, you know, the NPCs you were interacting with. But I would say it worked having a playable character that could speak. A lot of the things in Half-Life Alyx worked for Half-Life Alyx. I would honestly say that I would have a problem with some of these things if it wasn't Half-Life Alyx, if it was, you know, a Half-Life game with Gordon Freeman as the player, as the main character. I'd say there's a couple. There are definitely a couple things you would have to change about this game if you were to switch to Gordon Freeman as the main character. So I'll start getting into some more story aspects of it. You know, the main thing is you go into this vault. It's got a super weapon in it, and you find out that it's not a vault to keep people out. It's a prison to keep someone in. And you have new shady character you hear her talking to the Combine. Could have been Breen. I also feel like this game could have done with a Breen cast at one point. I feel like that would have been, you know, much appreciated. But there's this new shady character. We don't see her. She's talking to the Combine. She's talking about their prisoner, how he's someone who survived Black Mesa and disappeared after, you know, causing a lot of fuss with Black Mesa. And Alyx and Gordon and Russell, they immediately think it's Gordon Freeman, because that would be the most logical person at that point for it to be in. As soon as they started thinking it was Gordon Freeman, I mean, okay, well, it's not Gordon Freeman. It's going to be someone else. So then I started thinking, who could it be? I feel like me and maybe a lot of people, our first thought was maybe Adrian Shepard. It would be kind of cool if it was Adrian Shepard. It would be a really neat way to bring that guy back into it, because it does fit. You know, he did survive Black Mesa. He did disappear afterwards. But then I think it's like, no, Adrian Shepard. It would be really neat if it was Adrian Shepard. But that could be a deep cut to some people, because however many people didn't play Half-Life 2, there is a percentage. I mean, however many people just played Half-Life 2, there's a smaller percentage that played Half-Life 2 and Half-Life 1. There's going to be an even smaller percentage of people who played Half-Life 2, Half-Life 1, and Half-Life Opposing Force. So I was like, nah, it's not going to be Adrian Shepard. That's maybe a little bit too much of a deep cut. Then I started thinking, well, who else could it be? I mean, it could be Barney. But did Barney disappear after Black Mesa? I feel like his whereabouts were more accounted for. Could be Kleiner. That won't work as much either. We know it couldn't be Dr. Breen. And I was thinking, could it be a new character? That would be interesting, to bring a new character into this, especially if you're talking future Half-Life games. You know, introduce a new character to the canon. Maybe go back in time and make a Half-Life game, a Half-Life era game with this new character in Black Mesa. Could be the Hunt Down the Freeman guy, but, you know, the world isn't that cool. And then eventually I was like, I know who it is. It's the G-Man. because we hadn't seen the G-Man at this point. I don't know how it. I don't really know how it's gonna work for him to be there, but it's most likely that it's the G-Man in that prison. You're gonna open the vault and it'll be the G-Man. Which, oh jeez, as we know, that is who it ends up being, is the G-Man in the vault. And like right before you go into the vault, Eagle Eye Vance is like, don't go in there, don't go in there, but you go in there anyway. Which I'm curious as to what he found out about the vault and that data pod thing he was decrypting that would tell him, don't go into the vault. This video is getting long. But yeah, I mean, I guess it was a little bit predictable for me at least, that it was the G-Man. I mean, maybe the more casual people would have honestly thought it was Gordon Freeman, because you think, well, they have to have Gordon Freeman in this in some way, which they do. We're getting there. The whole vault stuff seemed fun, and then you get to that reveal that it's the G-Man in the vault. And the thing that I kind of liked is just all the crazy stuff going on around the vault, which just kind of, to me, says, like, even imprisoned, even somehow imprisoned, the G-Man is super powerful, that he's just like affecting shit around him. He's like irradiating weirdness and craziness. I thought that was really, really cool, but it also seemed like it could be extremely disorienting to some people, especially when you hear talking about how they kind of avoided Portal, making a VR Portal game, because they were afraid that might be a little bit too disorienting for people. So this seemed, this was just crazy, upside down shit, and multiple visions like merging into whole crazy shit. And then you get to the reveal that it is the G-Man. She doesn't know it's the G-Man. She's like, oh, hey, Gordon Freeman. And, we know it's not. And then he has that kind of like diss on Gordon Freeman. He's like, you wouldn't need all this to imprison Gordon Freeman. Which, it is pretty true. I mean, you might. Wouldn't hurt to have all that to imprison Gordon Freeman, but it does raise a lot of interesting questions. I mean, that's all we have about the G-Man. It's questions. All this does is give us more questions. And what I think is most interesting is she has that conversation with the Combine about how this guy we have in prison, he survived Black Mesa and disappeared. So now this is what I want to know. This is what I start to think about the G-Man, and what I kind of want to know is, now, does the G-Man have a civilian identity? Now, it's obviously he's not human. He's, different in some crazy, weird, unexplained way. But now, does he have a human identity? It's just like how Superman, which really Kal-El, has Clark Kent, his human identity. So, I'm curious if G-Man is, a person to the world. This person disappeared after the events of Black Mesa, because, I mean, we know people interact with him. I mean, obviously Dr. Breen interacted with him during the events of Half-Life 1, where he gave him the Zen crystal that they used for the test chamber opening shit. So Dr. Breen obviously interacts with him and knows him in some regard. I mean, he's not just gonna, oh, hey, random stranger, you got a crystal. Sure, we'll put the thing in the thing, but, I mean, it's Black Mesa, so maybe that would happen. So I think that's something that I would be curious about, if the G-Man has a civilian identity, even if that's not his real name, or who he really is, for the purposes of his goals and whatever his mysterious employers want to know about or want to do. Maybe he needs a civilian identity. I don't know. Other interesting stuff about the G-Man, how exactly he was able to get captured even. I mean, that seems like a very big deal that he was able to get captured or locked up. I mean, there's also the classic movie trope nowadays of, you know, wanting to get captured so they can break out. I mean, perhaps he was just wanting to get captured so because he knew Alyx fans would come over and break him out so he could further his plans and trap her. Something interesting with the G-Man that happened when you talk to him at the end, which is interesting to see someone actually have a conversation to the G-Man. It's a lot different from what we're used to. You know, usually it's the G-Man talking to somebody, so that was very interesting, having a full-on conversation with the guy. Is that, you know, obviously the weird stuff's going on, you're teleporting, weird, you know, stuff's going on with the lighting and the color and the saturation and crap like that. But something interesting is he kind of like, he like splits away, you know, there's like shadows of him walking away. So I wonder if that's like, I don't know. I wonder if that's something. Maybe it's not. Maybe it's just another weird G-Man effect. But you could potentially say, you know, maybe he just broke out of prison. He's got a lot of shit to do. So he's like sending another himself out to do something else while he's having the conversation with Alyx fans. Because he could very well, you know, be two places at once. Then he talks about, well, actually first he wants to reward Alyx. Alyx requests to get the Combine off Earth. He's like, nah, I can't really do that. But how about give you something you don't want? And then we cut to the end of Half-Life 2, Episode 2, something we're all very familiar with, where the G-Man, I mean, not the G-Man, where Gordon Freeman's watching Eli Vance die and Alyx Vance is over there. But now you're seeing it through the perspective of the younger Alyx Vance. The younger Alyx Vance is watching herself cradle her father's dead body, and the G-Man's like, I can give you the opportunity to save him. You know, just kill this Combine grub thing. Combine, what is it? It's a Combine Overlord, I think. Is it? Oh, I should know this. Oh god, this has been a long video, I'm sorry. But he kills the Combine grub worm thing, and also very interesting how he says, because of your actions, this entity will die, but this guy will live, referring to the Combine worm thing will die, but Eli Vance gets to live. So I think that's interesting. I mean, not just the implications of Eli Vance being alive now, what are the implications of that Combine grub worm being dead? I think that's something that might not get answered, but it would be very interesting to see. And then, of course, you do that. You save Eli Vance, and that was your first mistake. Now you're employed by the G-Man. He's got plans for you. You know, whatever it was that Gordon Freeman is incapable or unwilling to do, you're not gonna do. And you get the briefest little shot of Gordon Freeman, which was great. He's got the crowbar. And you see Gordon Freeman in the background, like, puts on his glasses and for whatever, I don't know. And then it cuts away, and you roll credits, and then, oh boy, and then you hear the HEV shoot, which is just great. Hearing that, like HEV suits saying like medical systems engaged or whatever, and you got Eli Vance telling Gordon to wake up, and now there you are, Gordon Freeman at the end of Half-Life 2, Episode 2. Alyx Vance is gone, which I guess she's now been taken by the G-Man. He kind of plucked her out, with some weird little time stuff he did. He took her under his employ at 5 years ago. He signed her up, but he didn't call her into action until 5 years later or whatever. So he's upset about the G-Man taking Alyx. He's like, damn him and his unforeseen consequences. And then Dog comes out with the crowbar. I don't know how Dog gets the crowbar. I'll have to see about that again. But it's just a cool thing to see Dog in. And gives the crowbar to Eli Vance. And it's really cool because what I think is really cool with Eli Vance, what they do, is how he's like, he's obviously really upset about Alyx being taken. And then he gets the crowbar. He's kind of like, he just kind of like calms himself, like, okay, calm down, focus, let's, we gotta push through this and get shit done now. And gives the crowbar to Gordon, now the player character, and says, we've got work to do. Which is honestly just great. I mean, 10 seconds, 10 seconds of playing as Gordon Freeman again is more than we've had in a long, long time. And I was honestly a little relieved with that end credit scene, because, the G-Man had his speech about how, Gordon Freeman is not getting it done, I'm going to use you now. And I was thinking, like, I kind of still want to play as Gordon. I mean, Gordon is, the protagonist of our series. I don't want you to, push him aside for someone else. So, it does seem like we will be playing as Gordon Freeman again next time around. Maybe not the next time around. I'll get to that too. But, so, after all this, people saying, oh, Half-Life 3 confirmed, right? No, Half-Life 3 isn't confirmed. Do people have, like, short-term memory loss? I mean, long-term memory loss or something? We're in the same exact boat we were in after Half-Life 2 Episode 2. I mean, it's possible. They definitely think maybe at one point they'll make Half-Life 3. We don't know. I mean, it's not confirmed. It's as confirmed as it was at any other time. I mean, not as confirmed. I mean, it's definitely more possible than it was, 3 or 4 years ago. But it's almost just like the clocks have reset now. Now the waiting game starts again. I mean, we've been down this road before, okay, honestly. Remember, Half-Life Episode 3 was supposed to come out, the next year after Episode 2. I mean, they had people working on Half-Life 2 Episode 4. So, it's not confirmed. Saying it's confirmed, it's just not. I mean, it's obvious that they were thinking about it at some point, making Half-Life Alyx. They wanted to tease us. I mean, we've got... It doesn't go too far into post-Episode 2 stuff. 10 seconds of playing as Gordon after the events of Episode 2 isn't very much. But it's I don't know, it's just not confirmed. So this doesn't, make me more hyped or more certain that's going to happen. Honestly, I still think Half-Life 3 is going to happen. I always thought Half-Life 3 was going to happen. Even, 3 or 4 years ago, like the Dark Ages, when we had nothing. I still thought Half-Life 3 was going to happen. And I'm as confident as I've ever been that Half-Life 3 is going to happen. This hasn't changed my opinion in any way. I mean, it seems like Valve has changed a little bit. They want to make more games, but, who knows? We got to see what happens. Now, I still think Half-Life 3 is going to happen. Now, what that's going to be like, honestly, they're not going to do this, but I've always said, just make it in the Source engine. I mean, you can get Black Mesa level quality graphics in the Source engine, just make it in there, and you're good to go. I mean, that's all I need, because, it's a story that I'm interested in. But they're probably going to do it they're most likely going to do it in VR. Now there might be a 2D mouse and controller option, maybe, but that could be a little bit of wishful thinking. Now, if they were to make it in VR, there are a couple things you have to change. I mean, you need to change some things about Half-Life Alyx if you were going to turn it into Half-Life 3. Now, for one, melee weapons. You gotta have the crowbar. You gotta be able to swing that crowbar around and bash stuff. I feel like that's going to be extremely satisfying to have the crowbar and just be bashing shit with it. So, you need crowbar. I feel like you gotta increase the NPCs, because you can't have Gordon Freeman talk. I think that's like the biggest possible no-no that you could ever make in a Half-Life game, is having Gordon Freeman talk. So, if you can't have him talk, you have to have other people talk. So you need to up the NPC Because if Half-Life Alyx, if Alyx wasn't talking in Half-Life Alyx, it would feel a lot more emptier. It was definitely a good decision to have her talk and have Russell talk with her. Even though I didn't really care for the moments where she's talking to herself, you know, where she's like, "Oh, I only got 3 mags left." I didn't care for that as much. It's a very common video game thing. You know, characters repeating lines over again, and it's definitely infuriating when it's the player character repeating lines over and over again. I mean, it's understandable with NPCs. You know, they can only have so many scripted lines. But yeah, you gotta have more NPCs in Half-Life 3, and you need to up the weapon count in Half-Life 3 also. You know, I don't want just 3 random guns. You know, you gotta have the crowbar. You gotta have the gravity gun. You want a SPAS 12. SPAS 12 has kind of been like a staple of the Half-Life game as much as the crowbar has. An MP5, you know, AR2, maybe even an AR3. You know. Crossbow, revolver, rocket launcher. Maybe even bring back some of the old stuff. Like, I've been playing Opposing Force recently, and I really love that LMG that you get. You know, maybe bringing that back would be pretty neat. You know, or trip mines, satchel charges, kind of stuff that I'm kind of curious why they weren't in Half-Life 2 after why they were dropped going from Half-Life 1 to Half-Life 2. You know, grenades. I didn't really like your grenades being limited so much in Half-Life Alyx. You could only have like 1 or 2 grenades, but obviously the HEV suit, you need to have that since he's going to have it at the point of Half-Life Alyx. I mean, at the point of Half-Life 3, he's going to still have it. So you kind of need to, if you make Half-Life 3, you got to kind of bring some of this stuff back. You got to increase the weapon count, increase, you know, because it seems like for a lot of Half-Life Alyx, you're kind of or honestly the most of Half-Life Alyx, you kind of seem like you're on the defensive, which works too. You know, I mean, you're Alyx. You're not, you know, you're a 19-year-old girl. Yes, you're supposed to be on the defensive, and I mean, you were on the defensive a little bit for, let's say, Half-Life 2. But what Half-Life 2 did great was that shift from you being on the defensive to you going on the offensive, which is kind of really what I liked about Entanglement. I've talked about that before, how much I like the Entanglement chapter. The Entanglement chapter kind of signifies that shift of going from defensive to offensive and really being a threat. And so, I mean, that's kind of what I want, especially when I'm playing with Gordon Freeman. You know, when I'm playing as Gordon Freeman, I want to be a, you know, one-man army blowing shit up, and, you know, wrecking shop and, you know, massacring Combine. I don't know. It would, that's kind of what you want with Half-Life. That's kind of what you would want with Half-Life 3. So, I don't know. Half-Life Alyx looked really fun, and honestly, after having played it, I'm not in a huge hurry. I mean, after having watched it, I'm not in a huge hurry to get the game. I feel like I have experienced it, so I'm not in a huge hurry to play the game. At this point, I'm mostly focusing on making sure when Half-Life 3 comes out, I'm ready for it. It's like, this isn't going to happen again. I'm not going to watch someone else play fucking Half-Life 3. When Half-Life 3 comes out, I'm going to have it. I'm going to be one of the first to have it. I mean, Valve should give me a stinking early release or review copy or some shit, but you know, that's a whole nother conversation that's not going to happen. But I'm going to be playing Half-Life 3 when it comes out. You better believe that. So I'm going to be, you know, putting away for a Valve Index, Knuckles, good controller. I almost don't want to get any of that stuff yet even, because I don't want to get an Index and then be like, oh, Half-Life 3 comes out, better have the Valve Index 2 to play it, and oh, fuck. So I don't want a situation like that to happen, so and it's most likely going to be a while, unfortunately, till we see Half-Life 3. But that's probably not going to be due to inactivity from Valve, because you got to think of it like Valve's making games again, right? But they're not just making Half-Life games. I mean, they got other properties that they want to make games for. You know, like maybe they'll want to make a Portal game. There's been lots of talks about Left 4 Dead 3. And, I mean, there's 2 other VR games that they're at some point of working on. Maybe they're close. Or, I don't know. But Valve has pre-existing stuff they want to make. Valve has pre-existing stuff they want to make games for. And they also might want to introduce some new IP that they want to make games for. They don't want to just make Half-Life games. They want to make other games. And then there's also the possibility of Half-Life 3 not even being the next Half-Life game. They could just make another Half-Life game that has, you know, you play as a different character in a different place and different stuff goes on, but it's not Gordon Freeman, it's not post episode 2, which I would be fine with that too. I mean, honestly, what I was thinking about, something that I would really like. I mean, I'd really like more Half-Life games that were cross over to different genre of games. I mean, I hope that at some point we have another, you know, mouse and controller Half-Life game. Even if it's not Half-Life 2, I mean, something that I was thinking of, I think would be really neat, is imagine like a Half-Life 2, imagine a Half-Life universe game that was, you know, an RPG where you play as like Adrian Shepard, and you know it's a Skyrim Fallout type RPG open world thing, and I think that would be a lot of fun. And I think it'd be interesting in that specifically to play as Adrian Shepard, because there's so much about Adrian Shepard that you really don't, you know, we really don't know about, especially post Black Mesa. So I think that could really work for the story. You know, G-Man gives you some speech, says, "Okay, Adrian, I need you to do XYZ for me," and he drops you into City 21, and you know you do stuff. You know, and it's kind of more up to you. You kind of given that free will to the character, to the player more. Like, okay, I could do what the G-Man wants me to do, or maybe I can do some side quests, or maybe I can, you know, not do what the G-Man wants me to do something else, explore this storyline, this plot thread. I mean, like, that could be a lot of fun. But the Half-Life universe, it's feels like such a rich world to me that I want to explore further beyond just the main storyline. So, I mean, it might be a couple years before we get another Half-Life game, and that other Half-Life game might not even be Half-Life 3. So, I definitely feel like we're going to be getting more games from Valve. I know we got a couple, like 2 more VR games that are supposed to be coming. Who knows when we're going to be getting those? So, I mean, people can view Half-Life 3 as more possible than it has. I mean, and honestly, it is. It is more likely to happen than it was 2, 3, 4 years ago. But for me, nothing's really changed. And that's not me being a pessimist. It's just me viewing it as how it is. You know, we're in the same boat. We really don't have any news about Half-Life 3, and I don't know, I'll be keeping up with the situation and seeing what happens. But with Half-Life Alyx, it's interesting. With Half-Life Alyx, what I'm really curious to see is how this game ages. And I don't mean like in a couple years, I mean long term. You know, 10, 15 years from now, what's the legacy of Half-Life Alyx going to be? Because obviously we don't have anything close to Half-Life Alyx, and we're not going to have anything close to Half-Life Alyx in a couple years. I think it's probably going to be, 5 or 6 years before. I mean, maybe, I don't know, but it might be a couple years before another non-Valve publisher comes out with a game somewhat close to Half-Life Alyx. But eventually it's going to happen. So what I wonder is, once we start getting other Half-Life Alyx level VR games, what about Half-Life Alyx is going to separate them? Because Half-Life was not the only first-person shooter, but we still remember Half-Life for all of for everything that it changed to kind of landscape of the game, with this storytelling, the environments, the world, the NPCs, and then Half-Life 2 comes along. It's not the only first-person shooter, but the AI and the physics specifically was kind of the big thing about Half-Life 2. And so that's definitely what Half-Life 2 gets remembered for being, for kind of introducing that physics. And Steam came along with Half-Life 2 also, which was big. So, if a game like Half-Life 2 gets remembered for kind of introducing the physics, I mean, when you look at Half-Life Alyx, it's not the first VR game. We've had VR games. I mean, we haven't had anything as big as this. So I just wonder, in 3 years from now, when we get a BioShock VR game, which is very similar to Half-Life Alyx, it's got physics, got some puzzles, you can pick stuff up and move stuff around. How is Half-Life Alyx going to distinguish itself from other future VR games that are going to come out? I mean, are we just going to, when we have a BioShock VR, Far Cry VR, Halo VR, that'd be really cool. If we start getting more and more of these AAA title VR games, these big budgets and stuff like that, what's going to separate them from Half-Life Alyx? Is it just going to be the fact that Half-Life Alyx did it first? But I feel like we could have done it before Half-Life Alyx, honestly. I mean, you could have... I think the big thing that it seems like separates Half-Life Alyx from every other VR game is just the fact that it had a bigger budget and had more people working on it. Is all it seems like to me. You could have had a game that came out 2 or 3 years ago in VR, and if it had a bigger budget and if it had more people working on it, like Vader Immortal or whatever, maybe that would be the first big deal VR game instead of Half-Life Alyx. But I don't know. That's kind of what I'm most curious about. Besides the future of Half-Life franchise and Valve games, I'm also curious to see in the long term how the legacy of Half-Life Alyx, so to speak, how it's remembered, what it has and what it brings, and maybe there's some aspect of Half-Life Alyx that future VR games don't do. Maybe that BioShock VR doesn't have smooth locomotion or something, and we remember Half-Life Alyx for being it was great that it had smooth locomotion. I mean, a lot of these other VR games don't. This was the first big VR. I don't know. But it's curious to see what these conversations are. So, and yeah, this was a long video. It's pretty much all I got to say about that. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time.